My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. I suppose if you looked at my life from the outside, you'd see a woman who had it all: successful career, a beautiful house, and a family that seemingly cared about me. But beneath the surface, it's been a different story altogether. I've always been the one who kept her head down, worked hard, and tried to stay out of the way. People tend to overlook me, and I've gotten used to it, but it doesn't make it any easier. I'm an accountant by profession, working at a firm where I've slowly, but surely, worked my way up the ladder. Numbers have always been my thing, and I take pride in the precision and clarity they bring to the chaos of life. But no matter how much I excel in my career, I can never shake the feeling that I'm invisible to the people who should matter most: my family. In my parents' eyes, I've always been the steady one, the one who didn't need the spotlight. They always praised my younger brother, Adam, as if he were the golden child. Adam was always the one with the charm, the looks, and the ability to turn every head in the room. From a young age, he was the one they had high expectations for. He was supposed to take over the family business, the one my parents had worked tirelessly to build from the ground up. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a background character in the story of the family legacy. I remember the day Adam was handed the keys to the family company. My parents looked at him with so much pride, as if I wasn't even in the room. I had been working for years, doing my part to support them and contribute to the family's success. But none of that mattered. Adam's name was on every document, every letterhead, every business card. It was as though my role had been erased, replaced by his. The business was his now, his future, his success, his everything. In contrast, I was just the reliable one, the one who never asked for anything. I was the one who always said, "I don't need attention," but in reality, I yearned for it. I yearned for validation. I yearned for them to see me as more than just the person who always got by, but it never came. At family gatherings, I would sit quietly as they all gushed over Adam's achievements. "He's going to be a great leader, just like your father," they would say. And there I was, smiling through the pain, pretending that it didn't bother me. I told myself that I was fine with it, that I was fine being the one who didn't need the praise. But deep down, I was dying to be seen, to be acknowledged for all the sacrifices I had made. What stung even more was that I wasn't just overlooked. I was constantly compared to Adam. My mother would say things like, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Or "Adam would have done this differently." It wasn't just the praise he received. It was the constant implication that I was somehow less than him. It was as though no matter how much I achieved, I would always fall short in their eyes. My independence, the very trait they admired in me, became a curse. They never saw it as strength. To them, it was just another reason to not worry about me. They never expected me to need anything. And so, they never gave me anything, not emotionally, not financially. I spent years fighting to prove my worth, trying to make my family realize that I wasn't invisible. But the harder I fought, the more they seemed to turn a blind eye. And I couldn't help but wonder, was I really just the person who didn't need attention? Or had they simply made me that way? As I look at my life now, I realize that I had been quietly carrying the weight of their expectations on my shoulders, all while they were too focused on Adam's future to notice. The resentment I feel now is not just towards them, but also towards myself for allowing this to happen. I had always hoped for a moment when they would finally see me, when I would finally be enough, but that moment never came. Instead, I've spent my life trying to carve out a space for myself, one where I can exist without feeling like a shadow. But at 32, I'm starting to wonder if I've been chasing something that doesn't even exist, a moment of validation that may never come. The tragedy struck during my brother Adam's wedding. The day was supposed to be one of the happiest in our family's life, a grand celebration of love, success, and new beginnings. But for me, it would be the beginning of the end the moment I realized just how little I mattered, not just to my family, but to my own husband as well. The wedding had been planned for months, and it was meant to be an extravagant affair, As expected from a family like ours, the venue was the most luxurious hotel in the city, with chandeliers that glittered like diamonds and a guest list that included everyone who was anyone in our circle. The grand ballroom was adorned with hundreds of white roses, gold accents, and towering floral arrangements. The cake alone cost $50, $1,000, an elaborate, multi-tiered creation covered in delicate fondant and golden leaf. Over 500 guests were invited, including high-profile business partners, politicians, and influencers, the kind of event that could solidify your status in the city. Adam was the center of attention. Naturally, he had everything going for him: charm, good looks, and the family's business legacy to fall back on. It was his time to shine, and everyone expected him to take the spotlight. But there was something about this wedding that gnawed at me, even before the chaos erupted. I wasn't one of the important guests. I had been placed far from the front rows at the ceremony, near the back where the lesser relatives sat. It was a cold, deliberate exclusion that stung deeply. I had worked tirelessly for years, doing everything I could for my family. But there I was forgotten, ignored, and treated like an afterthought. But the real betrayal happened later in the evening, during the reception, as Adam and his new wife, Vanessa, made their grand entrance into the ballroom. I couldn't help but notice the way people fawned over them. The spotlight was always on Adam, his success, his future, his family. But for me, I was left to watch from the sidelines, like an invisible presence in a room full of well-wishers. As the night wore on, I found myself standing near the bar, nursing my drink, when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "I can't believe Maya's still here. Why hasn't she left yet?" I heard Vanessa's voice. She was speaking to one of the other guests, a woman I didn't recognize. "It's honestly so awkward. She doesn't belong at this kind of event." The words stung, but it wasn't the words alone that cut me. It was the tone, the disgust and contempt she held for me. Vanessa, my new sister-in-law, whom I had never wronged, had no problem making me feel insignificant in front of others. My hands clenched around the glass as I struggled to suppress the tears threatening to spill. But that wasn't the worst of it. As the night continued, I was asked to step aside while the bride and groom made their rounds for photos. And when the time came for the toast, I wasn't even included in the group shot. I watched as the photographer called for all the important family members to gather for the photo. And I was deliberately left out. I could feel the coldness of the moment, like I was nothing more than a passing stranger in their world. Later, when I was finally alone in the hotel lobby, I pulled out my phone to check my emails, anything to distract myself from the gnawing emptiness. That's when I saw the subject line, "Confidential Financial Document." It was from an unknown sender, but the email looked legitimate enough, so I opened it. The document attached was something I hadn't expected to see in a million years. A financial statement detailing an offshore account in the name of Alex, my husband, the balance, a staggering $20 million. My breath caught in my throat. As I scrolled down the document, I saw the name of the beneficiary, Vanessa, my brother's wife. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Vanessa, the woman I had been deceived into welcoming into our family, had been playing a dangerous game. She hadn't just married Adam for love. She had been using him to secure her financial future. The offshore account wasn't just a secret savings account. It was her plan to steal money from the family business. The worst part was that Alex had been in on it all along. He had been helping her hide the money, feeding her information about Adam's finances, all while lying to me. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. How could Alex, the man I trusted more than anyone, betray me in this way? How could he be so complicit in ruining my brother's future for his own gain? I felt sick, both physically and emotionally. In that moment, everything I had worked for, my marriage, my family, crumbled into dust. I couldn't go back into the reception. I couldn't face Adam, who had always been so oblivious to the games being played behind his back. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine, like I hadn't just uncovered a secret that would change our lives forever. I walked out of the hotel, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them were clear. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air, suffocating me as I realized the full extent of what had happened. Vanessa had destroyed everything, but so had Alex, and I had been blind to it all, believing in people who had never truly cared for me. I could barely breathe. The world seemed to collapse in on me, the hotel lobby blurring into a haze of confusion and disbelief. My phone was still clutched in my hand. The email open in front of me like an accusation I couldn't escape. 20 million, the offshore account, the beneficiary Vanessa. The moment the realization hit me, everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my family shattered. How could he do this to me? How could I have been so blind? I had trusted him, loved him, sacrificed everything for him. And for what? So he could betray me, play me like a fool, and help that woman destroy everything. My thoughts spiraled in a whirlpool of anger and self-doubt. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as my chest tightened, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs. I thought about the years I had spent with Alex, how I had been the one to keep things together. I had always been the strong one, the responsible one, the one who kept everything from falling apart. I managed the bills, balanced the budget, handled the tough decisions, anything to support him, to keep our life together, to make sure the family was secure. But now I realized it was all for nothing. All my efforts, all the times I put his needs ahead of my own, had been ignored. I had given him everything, and now all I was left with was a name dragged through the mud. For years, I had worked to maintain the image of the perfect wife, the perfect partner. I had stood by him through thick and thin. Even when my own needs and desires were pushed aside, I never asked for much, just a little recognition, a little gratitude. But now, all those years felt like they had been wasted. I was nothing more than a background character in the story of his life. I had been used and discarded when it no longer suited him. As I sat there, my mind racing, I found myself replaying all the times I had been overlooked, ignored, or belittled by the very people I had tried so hard to please. Every family gathering, every business meeting, every moment when I had been the one to hold everything together while Adam basked in the spotlight and Alex sat back without a care. I had been the invisible one, the one who didn't need attention, the one who could take care of everything without anyone even noticing. But now I realized that was exactly why they took me for granted. Why was I never enough? I had always been there for them. But they never saw me for who I was. I had lived in their shadows for so long, desperately trying to prove myself, hoping that one day they would recognize me. But that day never came. Instead, I was the one who had been betrayed, humiliated, and thrown aside. It felt like my whole life had been a series of quiet sacrifices. And now, in this moment, it had all come crashing down. I couldn't stay at the wedding. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when my entire world had just unraveled. My stomach churned as I stood up from the lobby bench, my legs shaking beneath me. The thought of going back inside, smiling for the cameras, congratulating Adam and Vanessa, it was unbearable. The weight of their betrayal was too much to carry. I turned and walked out of the hotel, feeling like I was suffocating. I didn't care who saw me or what they thought. All I wanted was to be alone, to disappear into the night where I could scream and cry without anyone watching. As I walked to my car, I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. I had no one who could understand the depth of what had just happened, no one who could offer me comfort, or even a kind word. I had always been the one people came to when they needed something. But now, I was the one who needed support, and there was no one to turn to. Once I got into my car, I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I was paralyzed with emotion, anger, hurt, betrayal, and then, beneath all of it, a profound sadness that I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about Alex's affair, it was about everything. The years of living in the shadow of my family's expectations, the endless comparisons to Adam, the constant feeling of being invisible, the realization that, no matter how much I gave, I would never be seen as enough. I thought about calling Alex, confronting him right there, but something inside me told me that wasn't the right move. I had always been the one to hold everything together, the one who kept things civil, kept the peace. But now, I didn't want to play that role anymore. I didn't want to beg for answers or seek his forgiveness. I didn't want to hear his excuses. Instead, I chose silence. I chose to withdraw. I knew that if I confronted him now, it would only be to beg him to explain, to beg him to love me the way I had always wanted. And I wasn't willing to lower myself like that anymore. I wasn't going to allow him to manipulate me into staying in this toxic marriage. So, I cut him off. I didn't call him. I didn't answer his texts. I didn't respond to his calls. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, to hear him apologize, to hear him explain how he had been misled or confused. I didn't want his explanations. I didn't want his lies. Instead, I retreated into myself. I stopped attending family events. I stopped participating in social gatherings. I stopped pretending to be the happy, supportive wife, the one who always put on a brave face. I withdrew from everyone, my family, my friends, the people who once relied on me. The world felt like a suffocating place, and the only way I could breathe was by stepping back and cutting myself off. But in that isolation, I found something I hadn't realized I needed until now: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from resolving everything or fixing the problem. It was the kind of peace that came from finally stepping away, from finally saying no. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself over everyone else. But even as I withdrew, the questions lingered in my mind. How had I allowed myself to be so blind? How had I spent so many years trying to be everything to everyone, only to be discarded when it suited them? It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was the truth. I had been invisible, not just to my family, but to myself. I had been so focused on proving my worth to others that I had forgotten to prove it to myself. And now, the consequences of that had caught up with me. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to keep living in the shadow of other people's expectations. I had spent enough time doing that. Now, it was time for me to find out who I was, without anyone else's approval or validation. I had never felt so small, so utterly defeated in my entire life. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, and the emptiness I felt was like a heavy fog that refused to lift. I spent days in isolation, ruminating over the shattered remains of my marriage and the cruelty of those I had trusted most. But even in my darkest hours, something within me, a quiet voice, almost imperceptible, whispered that there had to be more to this story than what I had uncovered. Something still felt off, as though I was missing the final puzzle piece that would allow me to see the full picture. I had thought about confronting Alex, about confronting Vanessa, but there was something holding me back. Maybe it was the fear that they would just brush me off, that the facade of their perfect lives would remain intact despite everything I knew. But then, one evening, as I sat in front of my laptop, scrolling through business reports for the family company, I stumbled across something that would change everything. It was an email, a small detail I had overlooked in the weeks prior. It was addressed to Alex from an unknown account, one of Vanessa's associates. The email was carefully encrypted, but I had learned enough over the years to know how to access hidden files. The email contained an attachment, a set of documents detailing financial transactions within the family business. As I opened them, my heart sank. These weren't ordinary transactions. These were carefully falsified documents, fake invoices, hidden transfers, and accounts that had never been disclosed to anyone. The more I dug, the more I realized the magnitude of what I was seeing. Vanessa hadn't just been manipulating Alex. She had been systematically siphoning money from the family's business, diverting millions into offshore accounts that she controlled. The $20 million in the account that had once seemed like an isolated event was only the tip of the iceberg. She had been stealing for months, if not years, using her influence over Alex to ensure that no one would ever find out. I felt sick as I read the documents, realizing that my entire family, the very people who had dismissed me, had been complicit in enabling this deception. My brother Adam, with his obsession over the company, had never once thought to question Vanessa's business dealings. My parents, so blinded by their love for Adam, had failed to notice the cracks in their own empire, cracks that had been created by Vanessa and Alex working in tandem. The truth was unbearable. They had all been pawns in Vanessa's game. In that moment, something shifted within me. The years of silence, the years of being overlooked, the years of always doing what was expected of me. Suddenly it felt like all of that had led to this moment. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth, only to be ignored, belittled, and betrayed. But now, I had the power to expose the truth, to bring everything into the light. The realization that the family's entire fortune could be unraveled, the legacy they had spent decades building, rested in my hands, felt like a shock to my system. I wasn't just the overlooked wife anymore. I wasn't just the quiet, dutiful one. I had a choice. I could stay silent, continue to let them use me as their scapegoat, or I could take control of my own destiny and expose the lies that had been festering beneath the surface. I chose the latter. Without hesitation, I gathered all the evidence printouts of the financial transactions, copies of the emails, screenshots of the hidden accounts, and made my way to the family's estate. It was the perfect moment. Adam and Vanessa were hosting a small family dinner in celebration of their recent wedding. My parents were there, too, their faces glowing with pride over their son's success. I knew that this was the time to reveal everything. As I entered the house, I felt the eyes of my family fall on me. But for once, I wasn't intimidated. I didn't care about their expectations, their judgments, or their indifference. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me. I walked into the room where Adam, Vanessa, and my parents were seated. They were laughing, chatting, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I stood in front of them, the evidence in my hands, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity. "I have something to say," I began, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "Something that all of you need to hear, something that you've been blind to for far too long." Adam looked up, startled. Vanessa, ever the picture of confidence, raised an eyebrow. But she said nothing. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. Sensing the change in the air, I could feel their eyes on me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink back. "I've been quiet for too long," I continued. "I've kept my mouth shut and allowed all of you to walk all over me. But no more." I dropped the stack of documents onto the table, the sound of the paper hitting the surface sharp and commanding. "This is what you've been hiding. This is what Vanessa has been doing behind your backs." I pointed to the stack of papers. "She's been stealing from you, stealing from all of us. These are falsified transactions, hidden accounts, and stolen millions. And Alex has been complicit in it. Your precious empire that you've worked so hard to build, it's all a lie." For a moment, there was only silence. Adam and Vanessa exchanged a glance, their faces paling as the realization of what I was saying began to sink in. My parents were frozen, unable to speak. The room felt suffocating. "I know this isn't what you want to hear," I said, my voice rising with emotion, "but you need to hear it. You've been so focused on your legacy, your empire, that you've allowed yourselves to be blinded by greed. And look where it's gotten us. A mess. A family torn apart by lies." Adam's face reddened as he looked at Vanessa, who was now visibly panicked. "This isn't possible," he said, his voice tight. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Do you really believe that I shot back? Or have you been too busy basking in the spotlight to notice what's been happening right under your nose? Your wife has been stealing from you, from our family, and now you have to face the consequences." It was then that my younger son, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. His small voice rang clear and strong across the room. "Mom," he said, looking directly at me with an intensity that took me by surprise, "you're not the bad guy. You never were." The words hit me harder than anything else in that moment. My son, my precious boy, who had seen the pain I had carried for so long, had finally spoken the truth. The validation I had been seeking for so many years, there it was. In his simple statement, for the first time, I felt truly seen. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to hold back the tears. The room was still. Adam and Vanessa were speechless. My parents sat in stunned silence, realizing that their precious golden boy wasn't the saint they had always believed him to be. For the first time, they were forced to confront the truth of their own complicity, the truth of what had been hidden from them. In that moment, I realized something: the power I had been searching for, the recognition I had craved for so long, wasn't something I needed from them anymore. I had found my own strength, my own voice, and that was all that mattered. "Now, it's time for you to decide what kind of family you want to be," I said, my voice trembling with emotion but full of conviction. "But don't ever forget you've lost me in the process." And as I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind me, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I had finally found my place, not in their world, but in my own. I had never been one to make scenes. In my family, I had always played the quiet, supportive role, always in the background, always holding things together, always sacrificing my own needs for the sake of peace. But as I stood in the middle of the room, everything was different. My heart was pounding. But it wasn't fear. It was something else, a quiet, resolute strength that I had never felt before. Alex sat on the couch, his face a mask of guilt and shame. Vanessa stood next to him, her posture stiff. But there was no mistaking the anxiety in her eyes. They both knew what was coming, and I could feel the weight of their anticipation. But this time, it was my turn. I was no longer the woman who sat silently, hoping for their approval. I was no longer the one who always gave in. Today, I was the one in control. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but filled with a quiet power that I had never known I possessed. "I don't need your money," I said, my eyes fixed firmly on Alex. "I don't need your approval. What I need is to find my own peace and rebuild my life on my terms." The words felt like they had been building inside me for years. All the frustration, the anger, the hurt, now, they were pouring out of me, and it felt like a weight was lifting off my shoulders. Alex flinched as if my words were a physical blow, but he didn't speak. I turned my gaze toward Vanessa, who had been watching me silently, her expression tight. "And you," I said, my voice cold and sharp, "you will never have a place in my life again." There was no hesitation in my tone, no doubt in my words. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for myself, not just to Alex, but to the woman who had come into my home and my life, and had played a part in destroying it. I had given her the benefit of the doubt for too long, but now it was clear she was nothing but a manipulative opportunist. She had taken what was mine and tried to erase me from the picture. Vanessa opened her mouth to say something, but I silenced her with a sharp gesture. "Don't bother," I said. "I'm done listening to your lies. You've taken enough from me already." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The air felt thick with tension as I stood there, my hands trembling slightly but my resolve unshaken. Alex and Vanessa exchanged a glance, but neither of them spoke. I could see the discomfort in their eyes, the realization that they had underestimated me, but there was no apology, no remorse. There was just the cold, unspoken understanding that I was no longer the person they could control, manipulate, or dismiss. I turned away from them and began pacing the room, the words coming faster now, the anger and pain still burning inside me, but no longer holding me captive. "I'm not a side character in your story," I said, my voice rising. "I am the author of my own life, and I choose how it unfolds from here." I paused, looking at both of them, my gaze unwavering. For years, I played the role of the good wife, the perfect daughter, The one who always did what was expected. I kept quiet. I kept my head down. I supported you, Alex. Even when you didn't deserve it. I held this family together. Even when I was falling apart. And you, I turned to Vanessa, my eyes narrowing. You thought you could come in, take what wasn't yours, and walk away without consequence. My heart was racing now, not out of fear, but out of liberation. I had said the words I had been holding back for years, and with each sentence, I felt more empowered, more in control of my own destiny. I don't owe either of you anything, I continued. I'm done living in the shadows of your expectations, your deceit, your manipulation. I'm done pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I've spent so many years sacrificing my happiness, my peace, my dignity, but not anymore. I'm taking it all back. For the first time, I could see the shock in their eyes. Alex's face was pale, his eyes wide with the realization that he had lost me for good. Vanessa, too, seemed taken aback, as if she hadn't expected me to turn on her like this. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out, and I was done hiding. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settling in. From this point forward, I refused to play the role of the forgotten one, the invisible one. I won't keep pretending that I don't matter. I will no longer sit quietly in the background, waiting for approval that I will never get. I am done being your sacrifice, your scapegoat, your pawn. I am taking back my life, and I won't let anyone stop me. I could see the change in their expressions. Alex, the man who had once been the love of my life, now looked nothing more than a stranger. His eyes were filled with guilt. But it was too late for apologies. His betrayal had cut too deep, and no amount of regret would ever fix that. Vanessa, the woman who had once been my sister-in-law, stood frozen, her mouth open, but no words coming out. She had expected me to roll over, to forgive her, to allow her to continue her manipulation without consequence, but I wasn't the same woman she had once seen as weak and powerless. And my parents, sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold, were silent. I could see the shock on their faces, the realization that they had been so blind for so long. They had always expected me to just accept things as they were, to support their decisions, to keep the peace. But now, they were seeing me for the first time not as the dutiful daughter, not as the one who kept everything together, but as a woman who was finally standing up for herself. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was done trying to fit into their mold. I was done trying to make them happy. I'm leaving, I said, turning toward the door, and this time, it's for good. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of freedom, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer bound by the expectations of others, no longer defined by their judgments. I was free to live my life on my own terms, to choose my own path, and to rebuild myself from the ground up. For the first time, I felt truly alive. The days that followed were quiet, almost surreal. I had made my decision, and now it was time to live with it. The decision to walk away from everything, my family, my marriage, the life I had spent so many years building, was not an easy one, but it was necessary. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. I had lived in the shadow of others' expectations, suffocating under the weight of their approval. But now, for the first time, I was living for myself. I began to rebuild my career, not because I had something to prove to anyone else, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I was enough, just as I was. I wanted to show myself that I could succeed without the constant validation from my family. Without the need for their approval, my work became my sanctuary. It became the place where I could find peace, where I could find my own sense of worth. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about my self-respect, my independence. For so long, I had thought that my value came from the approval of others, from the accolades, the recognition, the love and support of my family. But in the process of letting all of that go, I discovered something far more powerful, the realization that my worth doesn't depend on anyone but myself. I don't need anyone to tell me I'm enough. I am enough, just as I am. I had been so caught up in the idea of being seen, of being acknowledged, that I had forgotten to see myself. I had spent years chasing an illusion, a dream of being the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect sister. But in doing so, I had lost sight of who I truly was. Now, I was learning to rediscover myself slowly but surely. The woman I had buried beneath the weight of others' expectations was emerging, stronger and more confident than ever before. As I walked away from the life I once knew, I was filled with a sense of freedom, but also uncertainty. There was no clear path ahead of me, no set roadmap for what my life should look like. But that was okay. For the first time in my life, I wasn't following a script written by someone else. I was writing my own story. I knew the journey would be difficult. There would be moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness would creep in. But I also knew that I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to being the woman who lived for others. I couldn't go back to the life I had been given, to the roles I had been forced to play. I had to move forward, no matter how uncertain the road ahead seemed. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about getting revenge or showing my family that I could live without them. It was about proving to myself that I could live for me, that I didn't need anyone's approval to be whole. I had spent so long trying to be everything for everyone else. But now, I was learning to be everything for myself. And in that journey of self-discovery, I found something I had been searching for my entire life: peace. It wasn't the peace that comes from external validation. It wasn't the peace that comes from fulfilling other people's expectations. It was the peace that comes from within peace with who I was, with the choices I had made, with the life I was building for myself. But even as I found that peace, I couldn't help but wonder, how do we define our worth? What makes us valuable? Is it the approval of others? Is it the love we receive from our family and friends? Or is it something deeper, something more intrinsic? Once we let go of the need for validation from others, can we truly be free? Or do we still find ourselves clinging to the hope that someone, somewhere, will see us, will recognize us, will affirm that we are enough? For so long, I had lived my life looking for approval, seeking validation from people who never truly understood me. But now, I was learning to let go of that need, and in doing so, I found something that was even more powerful than any approval I could have received: freedom. Freedom to live for myself. Freedom to be the woman I was meant to be, not the woman others expected me to be. But I can't help but wonder, how would you respond if you were in my shoes? Would you have the courage to walk away from everything you knew to create something entirely new? Would you be able to look within yourself and find the strength to live for you, without needing anyone else's approval? These are the questions I now ask myself every day, and I invite you to ask yourself the same. What is your worth? And once you let go of the need for validation, who will you become? The road ahead may not be easy, but it is mine, and that, in itself, is enough.